Chores bring a beautiful message.
Thanks, Maggie. Oh, well, it's lovely to be with you again, although just unfortunate it's because Carmel is unwell. So she's still recovering from COVID. So, yeah. So, but good to know that she is recovering. So that's the important part. Yeah. So, but it is a blessing to be back with you again this week. So, I'd like you to cast your minds back to June 2018, hoping that you can remember that far back. It's a few years now. So, it was the middle of the first Trump administration. War in Afghanistan was continuing to grind along. It was a pretty long war, that one. And the Syrian civil war was in full swing. Israel and Palestine were not at war, but there was plenty of dissent going on between them. India and Pakistan were having yet another tiff, and the world was going on doing all those things that the world does. And then, on the 23rd of June, in northern Thailand, there was a heavy rainfall. Now, that's not something that would normally make international news at all. But on this occasion, something happened which captured the world's attention. 12 members of the Wild Boars football team went exploring the Tham Luang Nang Non cave system, unaware that a dangerous change in the weather was on the way. They entered the caves, and a short time later, heavy rainfall began and the caves started to fill with water, trapping the boys who were aged between 11 and 16, together with their 25-year-old assistant coach, with no way to safely exit. I'm pretty sure you remember this. The plight of these boys trapped in the caves, hungry, in the dark, afraid, it captured the hearts of people around the world. Rescue teams and TV news crews flocked to the area, and the world held its breath day after day, not daring to believe that there was any way that the boys could be safely brought out alive. So remember that it was the 23rd, I think we said, of June when it first began. It was the 2nd of July before British divers found the boys alive. And the thoughts then turned to the seemingly impossible task of trying to get the boys out alive. Now, they weren't able to swim. This was a cave system that was hampered by narrow passages and muddy waters and strong currents. So it's estimated that the rescue effort involved as many as 10,000 people, including more than 100 divers, scores of rescue workers, representatives from about 100 government agencies, 900 police officers and 2,000 soldiers, 10 police helicopters, 7 ambulances, more than 700 diving cylinders, and the pumping of more than 1 billion litres of water from the caves. That's a lot of logistics, isn't it? So the conditions were so dangerous that you might remember a Thai Navy SEAL diver died. Now, I don't know about you, but that was the point when I lost hope that those boys were coming out alive. If a Thai Navy SEAL could not make it out alive, I was convinced those boys were goners. So to make things worse, those water levels were still rising. And yet on the 8th of July, the rescue operation commenced. 2 Australians, Richard Harris and Craig Challen, were playing a significant role. The boys, we learnt, were to be anaesthetised. Felt really counterintuitive that this was the right way to go, and then they were carried out unconscious by a diver. Now, if we thought we'd been holding our breath before, I think the world collectively went on life support at this point. The wait was agony. I can't imagine what it would have been like for their parents. The news came through. One boy had came out and he was alive. An agonising wait. And another boy. Eventually, one more. Bit by by bit, the news trickled through, revealing the good news of one boy after another having been saved from the flooding cave, until finally the coach was the final one to be rescued. Every one of them was safely rescued from the cave, and the rescuers hailed as heroes. Now, if you were like me at that time, this story took over your life somewhat. I was glued to the TV news every night, and I was checking my phone regularly for news to see if there were any updates on the situations. It was the topic of discussion around the work lunch table and with my family and my friends. And I can neither confirm nor deny that there might have been some tears when they were finally rescued. There are 8 billion people on this planet. What does the fate of a handful of teenagers from northern Thailand, who you and I will never meet, matter to us that this story should have been something that we were so greatly invested in? In part, it's because it's a fascinating story full of drama, agony, and heroism. But more than that, it's because something in us recognises that other human beings are more than just a bunch of cells, more than skin and bones and organs. Each human being is more than the direct benefit that that person can be to you or to me. Why? What is this dignity and worth that human beings have? That we recognise that there is something inherently valuable in human life. Science cannot give you an explanation. Atheist philosophy likewise cannot explain it. But God has made it very clear from the opening chapter of the Bible that there is a very good reason why humans have such worth and value, and it is because we are made in His own image. The story of Genesis 1 is one that we know very well, but maybe we don't actually know it well enough. Most of you have known this story since childhood, but I think it still has treasures to be unearthed as we dig deeper to uncover some of what God has for us in this very foundational chapter of the Bible, and in particular in these verses that speak about the beginning of humankind. To give you a very brief recap, the story begins with the world dark and empty. It seems quite bleak. The one comforting note is that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then suddenly, God springs into action and the work of creation begins. Light is created and the pattern of day and night established. The skies are made and the oceans and the dry land. The land is not left barren. God turns landscape gardener and fills the earth with plants of all kinds. And then comes living creatures to fill the world, birds and animals, insects, reptiles, fish, bringing the skies and the oceans and the land alive. The world teemed with life. Silence is overtaken with birdsong, the evidence of God's creative output everywhere. And each day, God looked at the work that He had done and declared it to be good. Thank you. You're awake. And yet, God was not done. There was one final step. Having spent one day each on all of the species of plants and all of the species of living creatures, God chose to spend one entire day on just one creature, humankind. Just think about that for a moment. One whole day on just this one species. Now, to put that in a little bit of perspective, hang on, it's not doing the thing. Can we move this? Yep, move the slides along. Okay, to put this in a little bit of perspective, here are some pictures, with any luck, that I took of wildflowers in the Albany region. Ta-da! Hang on, in just a moment. Sorry? Are they up yet? Okay, hang in there. Aha! Ta-da! We're in business. On a holiday a few years ago. Now, this is just a very small portion of the wildflower photos I took on that trip, and of course they represent a very small portion of the species that are out there. I might have a slight obsession, just ask my family. Look at the variety of colours and shapes and textures. Now, the photos don't give you a sense of the variety of sizes, but the flowers I saw varied from the absolutely minute to the reasonably large. Aren't they beautiful? What joy there is to be found in the beauty that God has created in this world He's given us to live in. Our southwest and great southern regions are in an internationally recognised biodiversity hotspot. The variety is breathtaking and suggests that God delights in creativity and beauty. And this is just a tiny portion of what God put into motion on day 4 of creation. So for God to give the final day of creation wholly to human beings alone, to just one species, after all the effort He put into the many, many, many species that He created on other days, tells us that God has something very special in mind for us. He doesn't want to just take time over this final masterpiece. He wants to spend time with us. Humbling. Let's take a look at what Genesis had to say. There we go. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in His image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. Sometimes the words are so familiar that we don't stop to consider, what does this really mean? Because it's so familiar, we often just assume that we know what it means, and this causes us to brush over the surface and assume things which are quite shallow rather than digging into the text and its background to find the real gems that are there. Some of the things you might hear about what it means to be made in God's image, that God is creative and therefore we're creative, or God who's Trinity, who's made for relationship and community and therefore so are we. They're things that are true, but they're not necessarily what the author of Genesis is getting at here. There are two important words that can help us to discover more: image and likeness. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, God says. Now, this portrait of Queen Elizabeth might look pretty familiar to you. Oh, yep, sorry, we've skipped. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Oh, it is not playing the game, is it? Okay, right, we're back in business. Okay, let's go back again. This portrait of Queen Elizabeth might look quite familiar to you. This one, or one fairly similar to it, has hung in many public buildings around Australia in the past, in schools, government offices, RSL halls, maybe in courts, I think. While the Queen was far away in England, and we Aussies were many thousands of kilometres away from her, these pictures provided a visual reminder. Elizabeth II rules here, whatever you may have thought of that. When the monarch herself couldn't be present, her image was a sort of proxy to let you know the proper order of things. Right. There we go. And if you were to reach into your purse or wallet and pull out some coins, assuming that you carry cash these days, what would you see? On the tails side, there would be native animals, or if you've got $2 coins, you'd have an Aboriginal man and the Southern Cross. What's on the head side of your coins? Now, older coins, of course, show Queen Elizabeth, but as of last year, the newer coins bear the image of King Charles. Now, I don't think I've had any yet, Or maybe I haven't been paying attention, but this is what they look like. The Hebrew word for image, tselem, translates to the Greek word icon, E-I-K-O-N. And yes, that sounds very much like a word we have in English, doesn't it? And that's because that word comes from that Greek word. So Jesus used that word to describe the graven image of Caesar on a Roman coin. The Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus with a question about the rights and wrongs of paying taxes to the Romans. And this is what happened. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the taxes." They brought him a denarius, so that was a common Roman coin, and he asked them, "Whose image or icon is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." So in Jesus' time, this word icon or image was used to describe the image of Caesar, which was used in huge statues at city gates and in his face on the coins that people spent every day, and in images and symbols of the emperor, which were found throughout the empire in many places. The purpose of the icon of Caesar was to declare Caesar rules here. That idea wasn't new in Caesar's time. In the ancient world, where very few people could read, there was no point hanging a sign outside a city saying, "King Artaxerxes rules here." Instead, the king would put up enormous statues of himself to provide those reminders, particularly around any distant cities where he couldn't personally be present with any great frequency. He needed a visual reminder to the people of exactly who was boss here. These words, image and likeness, were used to describe these statues. Here's an example. This is a statue of King Shalmaneser III of Assyria from the mid-800s BC. As you might guess when you hear his words, he probably wasn't the winner of Mr. Humility 847 BC. So inscribed on the statue are these words: "Shalmaneser, the great king, the mighty king, king of all the four regions, the powerful and mighty rival of the princes of the whole universe. I rebuilt the walls of my city Asher from their foundations to their summits. I made an image of my royal self and set it up by the metal workers' gates." This is a guy who had tickets on himself, wasn't it? So you're wondering, what have these statues got to do with you and I? What's the point? Let's follow this idea through. So first of all, in the other cultures that surrounded Israel, this idea of being made in the image of God existed, but not in the same way as the Bible used it. Here are some examples from the cultures in the surrounding region. Okay, in Egypt, only Pharaoh, the king, could be made in the image of the great god Ra. Kings were essentially divine. Ordinary people, very different to kings. In Acadia, which was another kingdom in the ancient Near East, people believed that the king is the very image of a god, but ordinary people were the shadow of a god. So things didn't even go that far in Mesopotamia. They believed that a son could be born in the image of his father, but only a god could be created in the image of the gods. So how does this contrast with the Bible? Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. God makes it very clear here. It's not kings or any kind of elites who are being made in God's image. It's the whole of mankind. Some of those people followed other false gods, but whether they knew it or not, they were being made in the image of the one true God. The same holds true today. People follow after many false gods: money, success, popularity, celebrity culture, and so on. But even if they don't know it, they are still made in the image of the one true God. So what does it mean then that we are made in God's image. What does this idea of statues of kings have to do with it all? Well, just as the statues of kings reminds us that King Shalmaneser rules in the city of Ashur, or Queen Elizabeth's portrait reminded us that she was Queen of Australia, even though they were far away from those places, we are meant to be living reminders of God's reign, even though we can't see him. Okay? When we see one another, we are supposed to be reminded that God is at work in this place. Old Testament scholar Professor Manfred T. Brauch says people are living statues, not like the dead statues of the Egyptian and other ancient Near Eastern kings. They are living statues who are mandated to carry out the heavenly king's work, will and purpose in his kingdom. Author Lisa Sharon Harper puts it another way. Because humanity belongs to God, one of our functions is to serve as markers of where God rules. Think about it. When you see another person, you're supposed to think, wow, God is at work here. So this is the point. That when we see one another, we're supposed to recognise the image of God at work. So we're supposed to say, Maggie, here's the image of God. God is at work. Lee, the image of God at work. Michael, here is the image of God at work. Fiona, here's the image of God. God is at work in this place. Helen, here is the image of God. God is at work here. That's the point. Okay, so that is what the Bible is actually getting at. When we see one another, we should see that God is at work here. And there's something else unexpected that God does. Compared to those other cultures, he doesn't elevate one single chosen leader to represent this kingly role and give him that responsibility of being his sole chief representative on earth. Instead, he creates all people in his image and makes us his children. We sang about that earlier, didn't we? About God bringing us all to be his children. So let's not miss the last 6 words in that verse. Male and female, he created them. Well, so what? What's the big deal? It seems pretty obvious to us that God created both men and women. Where else would we all have come from? But if we compare that to the creation myths of the other cultures around them, we have some really different stories going on. Woman was often seen as some sort of cruel joke played on man by the gods, or a punishment inflicted on men by the gods, or some sort of faulty version of the male. Women were, in some stories, made of some sort of inferior material. Women in the creation story of the ancient... Sorry, I skipped a line. Women were in some stories made of some inferior material. In no other creation story in the ancient Near East is there any suggestion that women were seen as equal to men. But the creation story in our Bibles places men and women on an equal footing. Both are created by God, made in the image of God, blessed by God, and given a commission by God. So both men and women are given this responsibility to represent God as his image bearers. Both men and women are tasked by God with reflecting his character and his purposes on earth and bringing about God's justice and peace as together we image him. I've seen the powerful truth of this verse being the starting point for a friend in an incredibly abusive marriage, turning around her understanding of who she was in Christ and ultimately then having the strength to leave that marriage and completely turn her life around. This truth is a powerful, powerful thing. God's word has the power to change lives for the good. What does this rule of man and woman together look like? God explains further. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and every living creature that moves on the ground." This command is also repeated to Noah after the flood. With over 8 billion people on earth today, I think we can say that humankind has successfully achieved the first part of this command. So, fill the earth, tick. But what about and subdue it? That's a bit of a hard one for us to comprehend. It's caused some difficulty. Now, unfortunately, some Christians have interpreted this as rip out all of the earth's resources willy-nilly with no regard for the consequences, because God has said, subdue the earth. God gave us the earth to use as we will. Let me tell you, this is not what God had in mind here. Greed and a lack of loving one another is implicit in that approach. Just for starters, this is God's world. We are given it to steward and to care for. It is, in a sense, like a library book on loan. If you use and abuse the library book with no consideration for the condition in which it will be returned, be prepared to face the wrath of the librarian, or at least some hefty library fines. When God's world is not looked after as God intended, then there are consequences. Frequently, it is the most vulnerable who will suffer. Torres Strait Island traditional owners have been in the news this week, having brought a landmark case to the federal court seeking to find the government negligent in regards to emissions targets and other measures which they believe are leading to their islands disappearing due to climate change. They fear that they will soon become climate refugees if there's not urgent change. While the judge was sympathetic, the case was lost because of matters of legal precedent. The Indigenous people of the Torres Straits have vowed to keep fighting. They have little choice in the matter while they watch the sea swallowing up the land in what looks like something of a reversal of the Genesis story. They're an example of the vulnerable people who suffer when we do not care for God's creation and steward the earth's resources with proper care. So what does subduing the earth mean? Michael Stead explains it well. Subduing here looks like careful gardening. Adam is to work the ground to make it productive by tending and caring for it. It's important that we recognise that the Garden of Eden, even in its pristine state, required humanity to work it. And if the Garden of Eden needs humans to work it, things were about to get more complicated after humans sinned in chapter 3 of Genesis, causing God to curse the ground. The work needed to tend it would become painful toil, and the land would produce thorns and thistles. Now, those weeds I mentioned last week in my garden, they're completely out of control when I went to hang the washing out yesterday. They definitely need some subduing. There will, I think, be some painful toil coming up in my garden very shortly. So the picture is bigger than simply maintaining the weeds. The Bible tells us that God is the ruler over everything He has made. Everything in heaven and earth is yours. You are the ruler of all things. God exercises His dominion by being loving to all He's made. It says, your dominion endures through all generations. The Lord is faithful to all His promises and loving toward all He's made. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. So you see that God's rulership here is exercised in a loving way. It's not just do as I say. Furthermore, God grants a dominion over the creation to humanity. You made Him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under His feet. So, We should carefully steward God's creation because the authority we have is essentially as tenants of the owner who lovingly and gently cares for this earth. We love one another and love God by caring for this world. So, it's the end of the 6th day, and God looks at all he's created, including human beings, and sees that it is not just good on this occasion, but what is it? Very good. Things will soon occur which are decidedly not good, which bring sin into the world of God's good creation. Things which will need a saviour to set them right. But even in a fallen world, we are still a people made in God's image, created to demonstrate to the world that the great King Jesus reigns here, and to uplift the dignity and worth of our fellow image bearers, and to care for his creation. Very good indeed. Before the worship team comes back, we're going to pray. Loving God, sometimes we struggle to understand the broken world we live in. There are times when we don't feel valued, or when our hearts break for the hurt we see going on in the world around us, and we're reminded that we are your image bearers, and that every person we meet is a reminder that you are at work in this world. Help us to see you reflected in each person we encounter this week. We're reminded too of the need to care for your world, whether in big ways or small. Help us to steward our resources well, to care for our planet and to love our neighbours, both far and near. Give us wisdom, generosity and compassion as we seek to be conformed into your image. In Jesus' name.